I can't believe I'm actually typing this out, but I need to know if I'm the monster everyone in my family says I am, or if I finally just gave a man exactly what he's been asking for over the last 25 years. Imagine standing in the middle of a rented ballroom, surrounded by 60 of your closest relatives, watching your father raise a glass to toast his legacy, only to have him look you dead in the eye and call you a loser in front of everyone he knows. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was a calculated, cold-blooded strike meant to humiliate me on the one day I was supposed to be celebrating with everyone else. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, and I didn't make a scene, at least not the kind he was expecting. Instead, I just reached into my blazer pocket, pulled out a single, folded piece of paper, and handed it to him while the room was deathly silent. Was I wrong for finally pulling the rug out from under him? Or would you have done the exact same thing if you'd been treated like the family's dirty little secret for your entire life? I really need you guys to be honest with me on this one, because my phone hasn't stopped blowing up with hateful texts from my siblings since it happened. To understand why a piece of paper could cause a total family meltdown, you have to understand the hierarchy of the Miller family. My father, Richard, is a self-made man who never lets you forget it. He started a construction firm in the late 80s and turned it into a massive regional powerhouse. To him, life is a scoreboard, and if you aren't winning, you don't exist. I have 3 older siblings, Marcus, Sarah, and David. Marcus is a high-powered corporate lawyer, Sarah is a pediatric surgeon, and David followed in Dad's footsteps as the vice president of the family company. Growing up, our dinner table felt more like a boardroom meeting than a family meal. We had to report our grades, our athletic achievements, and our social connections. If you weren't optimizing your potential, you were a disappointment. Then there was me, Leo. I was the accident child, born 10 years after David, and from day one I never fit the mold. I wasn't interested in law or medicine, and I certainly didn't want to spend my life on a construction site. I was the kid who liked poetry, photography, and vintage electronics. To Richard, that didn't just make me different, it made me a failure. He used to tell me that I was low energy and that I lacked the killer instinct that made the Miller name mean something. Throughout my childhood, I was the butt of every joke. At Thanksgiving, while Marcus was being praised for winning a multi-million-dollar case, my father would look at me and ask if I'd finally found a real hobby instead of taking pictures of old junk. He paid for my siblings' Ivy League educations without a second thought, but when it came time for me to go to college, he told me that he wasn't going to subsidize a vacation for a dreamer. I ended up working 3 jobs to put myself through a state school, majoring in computer science and minoring in business. I didn't tell him what I was doing because I knew he'd just find a way to belittle it. After I graduated, I moved 3 states away and started a small tech refurbishment company. It started in a garage, fixing old MacBooks and reselling them, but it grew. Slowly, I started specialized in data recovery and high-end hardware restoration for corporate clients. I wasn't a loser. I was a business owner. But because I didn't have a corner office in a skyscraper or a fleet of trucks with my name on the side, Richard treated me like I was a shift manager at a fast food joint. He never visited my office, never asked how my business was doing, and would frequently tell the rest of the family that I was drifting through life. The tension really peaked about 2 years ago when Richard decided he was going to retire and hand the reins of the family company over to David. At the celebratory dinner, he went around the table and gave each of my siblings a legacy gift. Marcus got a luxury watch, Sarah got a deed to a vacation property, and David got the promotion of a lifetime. When he got to me, he handed me a $50 gift card to a hardware store and told me, "Maybe you can buy some tools and finally learn how to fix something that matters." My siblings laughed. They always laughed. They were so desperate for Dad's approval that they'd step on me just to get a higher view of him. I took the gift card, thanked him politely, and went back to my life. What they didn't know was that while they were busy playing successful family, my company had just landed a massive contract with a national cybersecurity firm. I was doing well, really well. I had bought a house, invested wisely, and was actually in the process of acquiring a smaller competitor. But in the Miller family, if Richard didn't bless your success, it wasn't real. That brings us to the family reunion last weekend. It was Richard's 70th birthday and the 40th anniversary of the company. It was a massive black tie event. All the big players in the industry were there, plus our entire extended family. I didn't even want to go, but my mother begged me. She's the only one who has ever been kind to me, though she's too intimidated by Richard to ever truly stand up for me. I showed up in a nice suit, stayed in the corner, and tried to be invisible. But Richard had a different plan. He had been drinking, and his ego was at an all-time high. Halfway through the night, he took the stage for a speech. He spent 20 minutes talking about his warrior children, how Marcus was a shark, how Sarah was a savior, and how David was his true successor. Then, the room went quiet as he looked directly at the table where I was sitting. He sighed into the microphone, a sound that amplified through the whole hall, and said, "A man's legacy is measured by what he leaves behind. I look at this room and I see greatness. I'm proud of all my children, truly. Except, of course, for the loser who couldn't even manage to join the family business or make something of himself." The silence was deafening. I could see my cousins whispering, my siblings smirking into their champagne, and my mother looking down at her lap in shame. It was the ultimate public execution of my dignity. He thought he could break me one last time for sport. But here's the thing about dreamers: we tend to see things others miss. For the last 6 months, my company had been performing due diligence on a major acquisition. A large construction supply chain was struggling and looking for a buyout to avoid bankruptcy. As it turns out, Richard's powerhouse company had been their biggest client, and they owed millions in unpaid invoices, money Richard didn't have because he'd over-leveraged himself to fund his lavish lifestyle and David's poor management decisions. I knew his company was a hollow shell. I knew because I was the one who had just finalized the purchase of the supply chain company that held all of Richard's debt. So that's where things stood. My father had just called me a loser in front of everyone he ever wanted to impress, unaware that I was technically his biggest creditor. I had a choice right then and there. I could walk out and cry, I could stay and take it, or I could change the power dynamic of this family forever. Before I tell you what happened when I walked up to that stage, I want you to pause. Think about every time someone has looked down on you or made you feel small. If you held the kill switch to their entire reputation and career in your pocket, would you use it? Drop a comment right now and tell me. Would you have kept your mouth shut to keep the peace, or would you have burned it all down? I'm reading every single one of these because the guilt is still eating at me a little bit, but I need to know if I was justified. I stood up. The room stayed quiet as I walked toward the stage. My father looked annoyed, like I was interrupting his moment. He actually leaned into the mic and said, "Oh, look, he's finally moving fast for once. You got something to say, Leo?" I didn't say a word. I reached the podium, took out the folded document from my pocket, the finalized acquisition and the formal notice of debt acceleration, and I handed it to him. He looked confused, then he opened it. I watched his face go from smug to confused, and then to a ghostly, pale white. He stopped breathing for a second. He looked at the bottom of the page where my name was signed as the CEO of the parent company. I leaned in, grabbed the microphone from his hand, and spoke calmly so everyone could hear. I said, "You're right, Dad. Legacy is important. And as the new owner of the company that provides all your materials and holds your primary lines of credit, I think it's time we discuss your legacy of unpaid bills and mismanagement. Since I'm such a loser, I'm sure you won't mind if I start the foreclosure process on the firm tomorrow morning. After all, it's just business, right?" Room exploded. David jumped up, screaming that this was impossible, while Sarah and Marcus just sat there with their mouths hanging open. My father looked like he was having a heart attack. He tried to grab my arm, but I just stepped back. I told him that I had spent 25 years being the loser, while I built an empire he didn't even bother to notice. I told him that while he was busy mocking my hobbies, I was busy buying the ground he stood on. I didn't scream, I didn't curse. I just told him that his warrior children were about to be out of jobs because I was liquidated the assets to cover the debt he'd hidden from the board. I turned around and walked out of that ballroom without looking back. By the time I got to my car, my phone was vibrating off the hook. The aftermath has been a total circus. It's been 3 days. My father is claiming I tricked him and that I'm betraying the bloodline. David is begging me to reconsider because he has a mortgage and 3 kids, and Marcus is threatening to sue me, which is hilarious because he has no legal standing. My mother is the only one who called to say she was sorry, not for what I did, but for not stopping him sooner. She told me she always knew I was the smartest of the bunch. She was just too afraid to say it. I haven't decided yet if I'm going to show mercy. I could restructure their debt and save the company, but that would mean staying tethered to people who only value me now because I have power. Or I could let the foreclosure proceed, take the assets, and let them finally see what it feels like to start from zero like I had to. They call me cold, they call me a traitor, but for the first time in my life, nobody is calling me a loser. I think the lesson here is that you should never mistake someone's silence for weakness, and you should never assume you know someone's worth based on your own narrow definitions of success. My father spent his whole life building a monument to himself, and he forgot to make sure the foundation was solid. Now, the whole thing is leaning, and I'm the only one with the power to keep it from falling, or to give it a little push. Like this video if you think I did the right thing by standing up for myself and putting my father in his place. Subscribe for more stories about people finally getting the revenge they deserve, and please, tell me in the comments. Should I save the family business for the sake of my mom and siblings, or should I let them deal with the consequences of Richard's ego? I'll see you all in the next story.